Welcome back to the Fantasy Network, everyone. My name is, of course, Jimmy Nuts, and today we're going to be going March in a nutshell. I'm going to wrap up this reading month. I did have a reading vlog, but it was a lot more raw in the moment, discovering how I felt about the books I was reading, whereas this is going to be kind of like my solidified thoughts, and I've had a little bit of time and a little bit of distance from some of the reads. This might be better for people who are trying to save on time, because those reading vlogs are quite long. Plus, In a Nutshell is still the exclusive home of my Patreon pick of the month, which based on the numbers, people seem to enjoy quite a bit, and that's great. Let's wrap up this month that really kind of broke the mold of feeling like reading a lot of mid material, a lot of just average to below average stuff this year. This is the first month with just a lot of standouts, in my opinion. Also, one that I'm not super excited to talk about because I'm kind of tired of talking about it, and it was conflicting, and it kind of sent me into a bit of a spiral, but nonetheless one that I still think is important to talk about. So let's get into it with the first book being In Ascension by Martin McInnes. This is a first contact sci-fi book that was longlisted for the Booker Prize. Listen, the Booker Prize, just like any other awards, has its faults, has had its duds or whatever, but a lot of times when I'm going back to the Booker and I'm reading the winners or sub-finalists or whatever, I have been very happy with these picks. So I had to read whenever I had to read it. When I saw it was a first contact sci-fi longlisted for the Booker. And I'm so happy that I did read it. And I want to be very clear. I borderline loved this book. I thought it was fantastic. As of right now, definitely one of the better reads that I've had in 2024, but the year is certainly still young. With that said, I don't know if all of you out there are going to love it as much as I did, because it is very, literary fiction, but it is also sci-fi. And I think if you're going into this book looking for one and not the other, then the other side of it could end up possibly bringing down your experience if you're not into that. Definitely a story that encompasses a lot about humanity, but it is told from a perspective of a character that is a microbiologist that is sent down into the sea, has an experience and some discoveries, and this ends up leading all the way over to the first contact type of deal. I won't give you too many spoilers for it, but the perspective is so tight, and we get such intimate details about this main character's life that the tone is almost hushed and quiet, and it's almost like this reserved inspection of humanity and what it means to come home. And I really love the fact that the author, Martin McInnes, was able to link up such an intimate POV with such grand, big questions and ideas of space. So I think that the tone and maybe even the perspective might be slightly different than some would be expecting from a sci-fi book, but definitely not something that shied me away. In fact, I found it to be very unique in that sense. I think there are stuff here that is in a lot of sci-fi books, but I like the way this book handled it a lot more, and being so close to the POV was very welcomed. Now, the main character does have a very troubled past, and that plays out throughout the entire novel. Nothing seems to be for free when it comes to this person's backstory, and I thought it was just handled in a really wonderful way, a very respectful way, and even showing some of the dark sides of humanity. I still think showing the positives of family, of humanity, and wanting to return home to that. A lot of this feels circular in nature, and that goes for the characters and the plot, and I like that. I like it a lot. Now, the science in here at times, is cool, but it can also be somewhat, I would imagine, for some dry. I have heard also some critiques of the book that the science in here is not exactly perfect. I'm not someone that feels like it has to be. I definitely lean into the fiction part of science fiction. So even if there is some inaccurate science, I still found it to be very, very enjoyable. I'm just worried that whenever I say I really like this book, that people are going to rush out there thinking it's just this wicked first contact novel, but I think it's a lot slower than that and much quieter than maybe you'd be used to. So in some ways, I do wonder, who was this book directed towards? Because it feels like if you come in just for the sci-fi, you might end up being kind of taken out by some of the more literary aspects of it or the hush nature of it. And then if you came in for what would usually be on a Booker list, you might look at this and be like, oh, this science stuff, meh, I don't like it. So I struggle with that. I struggle for the recommendation portion of this. When I read books, I try to consider everyone that would watch a video, and I try to consider the experiences that people might have with a book, and this has to be one of the harder ones to pinpoint. It starts out slow and it's methodical, but I think by the time where it builds into some of the crazy sci-fi ideas and some of the trippiness of it, you almost feel like you're losing your perspective from a human POV. And I love that. And I also enjoyed the parallels that was drawn between the deep sea and space out there and what we know of the universe, and how maybe knowing a little bit more about what's deep could take us far out. These are all really cool things. I think the writing style is very approachable and at times beautiful, really. But overall, I kind of just enjoyed a different take on a First Contact story, and also the perspective writing was very strong for me. So I like this book quite a bit. I'm actually going to give it the nut button, with the caveat that I do think a lot of people might read this and find this to be boring if you're just looking for another kind of popcorn sci-fi read. I don't know. I've seen a lot of 1 stars for this book, and every time I read it, I'm like, you know what? I totally understand that, but that's just not how I felt about the book. I thought it was excellent. Now, the second book I want to talk about is A Little Life. A Little Life is basically what dominated my reading vlog, and I said at the end of the reading vlog that I was really tired of thinking about this book, and I'm really tired of talking about it already, and I knew this video had to be made, so I knew I had to struggle through it a little bit just to get this out. Here's the deal. I think that the writing is actually pretty damn good. I think some of the character work is good. There were aspects of the friendship early on in the book that I enjoyed, but by the end of the book, not only was I exhausted and fairly just grieving the whole process of reading the book and experiencing Jude's arc, but also just was kind of done. Just kind of done with it, and it really did stay and weigh on my mind. This is about a group of friends, if you're not aware. This is about a group of friends living in New York City, basically making friends in college and then continuing their lives and facing a lot of challenges, successes, and all of these things. It inspects, I think, some of the good parts of friendship, but a whole lot of the bad. And it goes into every single trauma that you could ever imagine is inflicted on one character, and you see how the people around this character deceive themselves and in turn actually, in my opinion, do not do justice or any sort of good thing for their friend, because they're willing to deceive themselves and almost want to buy the lie that this friend who is suffering is selling them, like, I'm okay, when in secret they are suffering. It's not a secret, at least for Willem, who's kind of the main friend for Jude. There's a whole group. And even some of the fallout in the first half of the book, I actually found to be pretty well written. I liked the way that the friends were letting each other down, but then it got to a point where I felt like it was almost just, I hate to use the word spectacle, but I felt like it was over the top. And the suspension of disbelief, I don't think is completely unreasonable, because some people live through extraordinarily horrific things. But overall, it just ended up feeling a bit conflicting by the end. And this is a book where, I like dark and grim things. I like depressing books for the most part.
You're kind of a weirdo for that, not gonna lie.
It is very strange, but there's something cathartic about reading a sad story that I've always enjoyed, and I'm someone who does ponder mortality quite a bit, and it's something that I don't want to say obsessed with, but it's just something that is a constant that is on my brain. And when I read that this book was so sad and so depressing, I was actually kind of looking forward to it, because I'd like to see someone else's perspective on mortality. But the only thing I could draw out of this book by the end of it, and the lesson that you could take from Little Life, is that we really should just listen and treat each other better. That's it. And then knowing some of the author's stances on therapy and males, I think she has a very stunted view of how males deal with emotion. I think it's a sweeping generalization that we are emotionally stunted as males, all of us, no matter what the circumstance or the friendship is. And at times I think that made the book feel a bit insulting as well. And if maybe not kind of putting out like a harmful stereotype about males. I don't know if anyone would read this book as a male and come out of it feeling like you're empowered to make better decisions. Not saying that that's the responsibility of the novel. But on the flip side of that, it didn't really give me any finer points other than, man, we should really treat each other better and try to do better. But I could have gotten that from just reading the first half of the book. So I just didn't feel at all compelled by the second half of the book, and mostly was just kind of like looking through my fingers at the page at times. So this was also just a very difficult read, because like there's any kind of trauma you can think of is in Little Life. And it was triggering for me, to be honest, without diving into details and stuff. And so it was just very troubling, and definitely took a lot out of me. So that's it. Certainly not getting the nut button. I don't think I really recommend it, but I do see why some people would enjoy it. And I don't I don't know. I'm done talking about it. I don't want to talk about it anymore. Little Life, it's over, thank God. On the flip side of that, Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell is one that I squeezed in here as a side read, ended up taking over my entire TBR, put everything else on pause and read it. Cloud Atlas by Dave Mitchell. I keep calling him Dave Mitchell. We're not friends. David Mitchell actually eclipsed Bone Clocks for me, and is now not only just one of my my favorite David Mitchell book so far, but also one of my favorite books of all time. Kind of skirts the line of a collection of short stories or novellas, and then also being a novel. Many different POVs, different characters, different voices as well, happening in big swaths of different times. And the story works as these 6 stories are told to you, and then in the order that they are told, it's the reverse on the back half of the book. So the first story you read is also the last story you read. And I want to reread this so bad and actually read the sections of the stories instead of getting them split and changing each chapter apart, just reading them together and then seeing if I can actually etch out the timeline. I think I'd be able to find some more of the really cool world building stuff here as well. But that's what Cloud Atlas is. It's tackling a lot of the problems that we have in humanity, seeing how we face those challenges in different time periods, but also with different types of people in different cultures. And predatory nature is explored very well here, but also, I gotta say that this book is very funny, and Mitchell has range not only when it comes to character voice and writing styles, which he's almost putting on an Olympics of writing, in my opinion, but also in just the tone of the book and his ability to make me laugh, make me cry, and make me think. Cloud Atlas is just an absolute amazing book. I know there's a movie that Tom Hanks was in. I've heard mixed things about it. I've heard it's very ambitious, like the book is. I'll probably watch it at some point, but without a doubt, the book is literally one of the best things I've ever read. I was enthralled by it, even though the first section of this book is so difficult to get into because of the way it's written. It's written in this voice of someone from back in like post-Gold Rush that is visiting New Zealand, and there's Aboriginals there, and like the language is just really dense and really pretentious, and I hated the first 40 pages, but after that, boom, took off, and each story got better and better and better. That was my experience. Nut button easy. But I also wanted to take time to say, if you're going to pick this up because you're like, man, Jimmy really loved this book, I need you to know that because this book is so ambitious and really just has a small through line through the stories that you then can take and turn this from a collection of short stories to a novel by connecting really a lot of the thematic work, but also some maybe the idea that we pass on something as we go on. But because of that, I think with the collection of short stories that are so different in tone and different characters, I think there are going to be some people who like some parts better than others. Totally natural. I like some parts better than others. However, there might be parts that you hate and only like the others. So your experience is going to be wildly different compared to mine. So if you end up reading this and hating it, I'm sorry. But for me, not considering the wider audiences, just as a personal experience, it was a pleasure. It was one of the best. An absolute magnificent experience for me as a reader. I was reading it in lines as I was waiting for rides at Universal. I could not stop reading this book once it got good. So I hope that you'll give it a shot, but I also hope you'll keep an open mind that this is not going to be your typical book. It is doing a lot. And I think David Mitchell took a huge risk, and it ended up paying off. The Sarantium Mosaic by Gavriel K. This is a duology that I've been wanting to read, and I read the first part of it, which is Sailing to Sarantium. And I thought it was excellent. It was probably my favorite writing from GGK, though I did talk to my friend Jared, and he still prefers Tagana's elevated prose. But for some reason, Sailing to Sarantium, about a mosaicist who is going to the city, and in place of someone who he is not, by the way, so he's kind of an imposter. There's something about the artistic nature of the story that I think does come through in the writing, and it's one of the reasons why GGK is one of the best fantasy authors of all time. It really felt like this tight package that was being presented to me by Gavriel K with his best setting ever. At least in the books that I have read. So, your mileage might vary if you've read more than me. Sarantium Mosaic is Byzantine inspired. I don't know much about the Byzantine Empire outside of just a couple things, but this setting did feel distinct enough to really stand out in a fantasy genre where, to be quite frank with you, a lot of stuff just feels a bit gray or a bit samey to me. I was worried that with the Byzantine inspiration that, I don't know Byzantine history all that well. I was kind of worried it'd be lost on me. And that has happened to me in some Gavriel novels as well. Not here. Not here. I felt like I could smell like the dust kicking up. And whenever we get into some of the scenes on the way to Sarantium, there is a scene that involves an animal, I'm keeping it super vague, that I thought was just stupendous, awe-inspiring, jaw-dropping. There is a chariot racing scene that is like some of the best hype material I've read, and I never thought I would say that about a chariot race, but here we are. And this is what Gavriel has always excelled at for me, is making me care about things I never thought that I would care about. The back half of the book, not as good as the first half for me, but it's also book one. A true book one, not a duology that is loosely tied together, but genuinely the first half of a story. So Lord of Emperors has to follow, and I will read that in April. But I thought Sailing to Sarantium was really, really great, and it's also going to get the nut button. We are 3 nut buttons in, and I still got one more to give out. So we got some, Cloud Atlas collection of multiple POVs that does kind of venture into sci-fi at some point, which was really cool. Obviously, First Contact sci-fi. Gavriel is a historical fantasy, little life, contemporary fiction. But it was time for me to return to one of my favorite fantasy worlds ever, and that is Ostenhard by Tad the Mad Lad Williams. Tad the Chad, baby. Tad time. Tad time here on the Fantasy Network. He's been one of my favorite authors to talk about here. I had the pleasure of interviewing him, and a lot of the interview was talking about how I could not wait to read the sequels to Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, which is The Last King of Ostenhard. The Ostenhard series has been spanning many, many decades and will conclude this year, as at least to this point. I'm sure he'll write some more stuff in that universe, but Last King of Ostenhard will be finished this year, so I want to get ready for that release. And I read the novel, The Heart of What Was Lost, which is a bridging novel. It's only 200 pages, but it basically gets you ready for Last King of Ostenhard right after Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. I really did not know what to expect from this. A lot of people say it's a required reading, and I agree, because in 200 pages, Tad really makes some things more interesting than they even were in the first 3 books. And I love Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, but he is starting to spin the wheels in a very different way that worked for me. And the thing that was most impressive about The Heart of What Was Lost is not just the fact that it's 200 pages, and Tad Williams struggles to keep it under 1,000 pages a lot of the time. So I was impressed that it was 200 pages, but also just how much I felt in 200 pages. One, calling back to the original trilogy and reminding me how much I love this world. Without a doubt, one of my favorite fantasy worlds from one of my favorite authors. But also characters, just mentions of their names, getting a little heartstring plucked. I'm like, oh yeah, I care about that character quite a bit. And he introduces some new stuff in 200 pages that I care a whole hell of a lot about. And I was already so excited for Witchwood Crown. I am beyond stoked now after reading Heart of What Was Lost, because it's clear that Tad Williams continues to improve as he writes. And I just have this strong feeling that Last King of Ostenhard is going to rocket up my all-time favorite series list. I mean, Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn's already in the top 10 for sure, but this could be major. And I just love being in an epic fantasy world. If I want epic fantasy, I don't know if there's many people above Tad Williams on who I would count to deliver. So it's time. It's time to get into Ostenhard. I'm going to start Witchwood Crown probably in May, and then read a book every 2 months and get ready for the fall/winter release of the final book. But Heart of What Was Lost, don't skip it, folks. If you've read Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, you should definitely check this out. It's only 200 pages, and it's so good. And Tad takes so much care of going through every little detail, making sure that all the characters get their opportunity to see it and to react. There's scheming going on as well, which is really neat. And also, this does take place directly after To Green Angel Tower and some of the fallout of after those events. And you begin to see a little bit of a different side of that. And also, based on the ending of Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, you're seeing what happens when there's catastrophic change for a people, and how people will grasp at power or try to maintain it. And these are all very relevant themes to today, and I find them to be fascinating, as always, whenever Tad chooses to do something like this. So The Heart of What Was Lost does get the nut button. That is 4 nut buttons in 1 month, and I'm ecstatic because honestly, this year was looking real rough until this month. There's been some great stuff, but this is a just knock out of the park month. And even though A Little Life did depress me quite a bit, and I have complaints about it, I still gotta say that I'm glad that at least it made me think. It has led to some really good conversations with people. So even that, I don't consider to be a negative experience in the sense that like I should have never, ever, ever read this. It was tough to get through. I know I will never read this again. However, at least it led to conversations and thoughts. And that's something. That's better than feeling apathetic. And now with all that done, I said this was going to be concise. I got to do a better job. Now, let's do the Patreon pick of the month. How about it? This month's Patreon pick of the month is brought to you by our sponsor, my patrons. I don't have any other sponsors, but I have the best sponsors in the fact that there are patrons who have been supporting me for many years at this point. And I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, I appreciate it so much. I appreciate you supporting the channel, and it has allowed me to reinvest here and, hopefully make stuff better and better and better as I go. So let's see who wins the April Patreon pick of the month. All right, and the winner is, I'm going to try to pick from like the side. I feel like I always go towards the middle. And the winner is number 31, and that is Alex W. Tall Guy Reads, I think. Is that still you? Is The Changeling. I don't know anything about this book. I'm fairly certain it's super sad. So that is another Patreon book that's going to probably be depressing. Let me look up the details and Google it. All right, so it's The Changeling by Victor Lavelle. It has 23,000 ratings on Goodreads and a 3.79, which means that it's probably going to be a banger because whenever something's a 3.7 on Goodreads, that means people are 1-star and 5-star in it. And I generally end up being one part of the 5-star crowd or the 4-star. I see one of my friends ranked it 1 star and put easily one of the worst books I have ever read. And then right under it, another person I know gave it 5 stars. So I'll be reading The Changeling as the Patreon pick of the month, but I'll also be reading Lord of Emperors by Gavriel K, and I'll be finished Hard Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World by Murakami. That should be done like in the next day or two. I'll talk about that in the next wrap up. Outside of that, there's so many books I want to read. I really, really got to figure it out and hammer down at least like month by month what I want to read. Children of Dune, I started that. I should probably finish that at some point. I started a lot of books. I started rereading Gardens of the Moon. I don't know. I will be doing a reading vlog, though. They're probably going to be a little bit more condensed. They could still be as long, but they'll probably only cover like 2 books at a time because it's a little bit easier to kind of keep it going. But we'll see. Hey, thanks for checking this out. Sorry if I'm super long-winded. I feel like I just have a lot to say about books right now, and that's not always the case, so that feels really, really, really good for me. I feel like spring is coming, and maybe possibly I'm coming out of my shell a little bit that I've been in. So, hey, thanks for being here. If you like this video, you can hit like, and if you dislike it, you can hit dislike. If you love to think about subscribing, I would love to have you here. There's a Patreon in the description. It's optional, but always appreciated. Till you see you next time. Be good, be safe, and remember to always keep turning the page. I'm going to give a big shout out to my patrons, including my high tier patrons, my Kingsguard, which include Bridger, Zan, Adam K, Emil, Jonathan J, Prithi, Eric B, Chadia, Steve Talks Books, Taylor D, Matthias D, Carlos, Yolanda, John C, John, Garrick, Evie, Henrik, Benjamin C, Sebastian M, Frank C, C. Scott, Jacob W, Darren, Jobot, Terrence F, Michael B, Lauren M, Nicholas E, Kai C, Kev, Ryan, Shad, Amanda V, Ikaika, RJ, Shad, Stuart C, Oscar A, Derry, Tanner, Stromboli Bones, Damon H, Kuiper, Adam, Caitlin S, Boss, and Curran G. Thank you all so much. You're the best.